Right. Welcome everyone to our 24th INFOGEST webinar. We are delighted to bring you another session today where we are showcasing work that is centralized around food digestion. And today I'm joined by Eva Hernandez, and together would like to welcome Sara Perez Villa. She will be joining us in coordinating these webinars. And as our guest today, we have Aida Zapico Linares. Aida, we are happy to have you today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope you all enjoy my work and get to learn a little bit.
Absolutely. So Aida recently completed a PhD at the Department of Functional Biology at the University of Oviedo in Spain, and her research focused on the intake of xenobiotics formed during cooking and food processing, and how these compounds may modulate gut microbiota and immunological parameters. We'll move on now to Aida's talk, which is titled Dietary Strategies to Counteract the Impact of Xenobiotic Intakes through Modulation of Gut Microbiota and the Immune System. So following her presentation, there's going to be a live question and answer session. So we are encouraging you to submit your questions in the question and answer tab down below. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. My name is Aida Zapico, and I will present a few results of my thesis titled Dietary Strategies to Counteract the Impact of Xenobiotic Intake on the Intestinal Microbiota and the Immune System from the University of Oviedo, Spain. First of all, I would like to explain a little bit the background through this introduction. Nowadays, we know that among all dietary patterns available, the Mediterranean diet is the one presented higher evidence for its potential to protect on health. More specifically, for example, it has been associated with a reduced risk of mortality for all causes. Despite this evidence, in the last decades, we've seen a loss of Mediterranean diet in substitution of the westernized dietary pattern, and this tendency is especially higher among low-income individuals, which presents a higher tendency towards the consumption of ultra-processed foods. The higher consumption of ultra-processed foods, red meats, or processed meats is typical of the westernized dietary pattern, and along with the cooking techniques of this diet, such as grilled or barbecue, this pattern promotes the intake of could promote the intake in higher amounts of xenobiotics. These compounds are formed during cooking and processing of foods, and some of these compounds are the heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, nitrates, nitrites, and nitroso compounds, and acrylamide. The intake of these compounds has been associated with an increased risk of intestinal lesion, adenoma, or polyps, and they have been classified as possible or probable carcinogenic to humans by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. This effect on the intestinal mucosa is at least partially mediated by microbiota and immunological parameters. So in this context, the objective of my thesis has been to evaluate the potential of Mediterranean diet or diet-derived compounds to counteract the impact of the intake of xenobiotics on intestinal mucosa through the modulation of intestinal microbiota or immunological parameters. For this, the materials and methods that have been performed are the following. First of all, we developed a dietary instrument for the quantification of these compounds, since this was not available in the literature. We used a food frequency questionnaire in which, through the intake of 155 items online, we assessed the intake of these items in order to analyze the intake of xenobiotics. For this, information on cooking techniques, degree of dullness, or cooking habits was especially important, since these characteristics regulate the formation of these compounds during cooking and processing of foods. For this, in this questionnaire, information on cooking techniques such as boil, grill, or fried were included. People or volunteers were asked to include the degree of doneness of their foods from undercooked to very well done. Also, some cooking habits, such as the part of the food that is being consumed, for example, in the case of chicken, breast or thigh, or also the cooking and or possible eating of the skin in the case of the chicken. In order to facilitate the completion of this information, some photographic material was developed specifically for this study and included in these questionnaires, so individuals could refer more easily the degree of doneness of their foods. Once this food frequency was developed, it was validated with 3 24-hour dietary calls, 2 during the weekdays and 1 on weekends. And this questionnaire, also online, included specific information for the cooking techniques, habits, degree of doneness, as well as the photographic material that was specifically developed for this study. From the total sample of 70 individuals without diagnosed digestive condition, almost 40 participated in the validation. And after the analysis of the data obtained, we could conclude that the method developed was particularly accurate for the estimation of heterocyclic amines, such as PHIP or FIP, and nitrosamines, such as N-nitrosodimethylamine. Also, we compared the level of intake in our sample of individuals with the ones referred by other authors, and we saw that the level was in the range of those described by authors using similar databases. And the intake of PHIP-FIP was the one showing the greatest level in the population. Finally, for the first time in the literature, in this thesis, we've seen that those individuals with a greater level of alteration of intestinal functionality, for example, with bleeding, hemorrhoids, or greater alteration of RON3 functionality criteria, presented a greater intake of these xenobiotics, heterocyclic amines such as IQ, nitrates, and nitrosamines, and other polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. This is especially important because for the first time, although the intake of these xenobiotics have been associated with an increased risk of adenoma or polyps, for the first time we've seen a possible association with a greater alteration at the intestinal level in those individuals without diagnosed digestive condition. Once our method was developed and validated, we could continue with the objectives of the thesis. For this, first of all, we wanted to evaluate the potential of Mediterranean diet to reduce the impact or intake of these compounds. For this, we used a sample of individuals that were at risk of food insecurity. These individuals usually present higher tendency towards the consumption of ultra-processed foods. And in this case, our sample of study were receivers of food programs by Red Cross, and they periodically receive some non-perishable foodstuff. However, they lack access to fresh foods. And for this, we developed a dietary intervention with Mediterranean diet on this sample of individuals that consist of, first of all, 1 hour educational session stating the basis of Mediterranean diet, and also the provision of an economic voucher for fresh food shopping that was financed by Alimerca Foundation. Also, we developed specifically for this project some education materials such as a shopping list adjusted to the budget, a monthly meal plan divided in 5 meals promoting the intake of fruits, vegetables, legumes, and fish, and also some recipes or tricks to reduce food waste. These education materials are available at the website of Alimerca Foundation. For this intervention, we first recruited 20 individuals from Red Cross, and during the first week, these individuals were familiarized with the objectives of the study. Afterwards, the 4-week intervention started, and at the end, only 17 individuals presented information for diet and microbiota. All their variables studied before and after intervention were general characteristics such as level of physical activity using validated questionnaires, microbiological and biochemical determinations such as cytokines, glucose, or cholesterol circulating levels, some anthropometric determinations as well, and other indicators of health status, such as the severity of depressive symptoms using the Beck Depressive Inventory 2 questionnaire, and also some sensorial perception tests were performed in order to determine sucrose and salt discrimination and sensitivity. Once this intervention on individuals was performed, the following step was to undergo an intervention on animals in order to elucidate the potential of diet-derived compounds such as prebiotics or probiotics to reduce the impact of the intake of xenobiotics, and also to elucidate the mechanisms through which microbiota and the immunological parameters could mediate this effect. For this, we used a FIB plus DSS model because FIB was the xenobiotic presenting the greatest level of intake in the population and in other studies, and DSS would reduce the time required for FIB to exert an effect on the intestinal mucosa. This model has already been used in the literature. However, in our study, we've used lower doses of FIB, and the ones used 1 parts per million was similar to the level of intake observed in the population of 188 nanograms per day. This FIB plus DSS was administered through oral gavage in the case of FIB, and dissolved in water and administered and available ad libitum in the case of DSS. And this combination of compounds was administered during 3 weeks of the total 5 weeks of the intervention. At baseline, in order to perform this intervention, 44 male fish rats were randomly allocated into 4 groups. The control group presented a standard diet along the 5 weeks. The FIB plus DSS group, in which along with FIB plus DSS a standard diet was provided, and also in the probiotic and fiber group, we provided some FIB plus DSS along with a special diet, supplemented with probiotic or supplemented with fiber. These special diets were obtained from Safe Diets company, and in the case of the probiotic, it was especially developed for this study, with a mixed probiotic product to guarantee a level of intake of 10 to the 9 colonic forming units per day. In the case of the fiber diet, a 6% supplementation was provided to these animals. Dietary intake, the water intake, and body weight were followed along the 5-week, each day along the 5-week intervention, and also some fecal samples from these animals before treatment and after treatment, and at baseline and at the end of the intervention were obtained for the analysis of fecal microbiota, profile composition, and short-chain fatty acids determinations by gas chromatography. After the 5-week intervention, the colon was excised and we measured colon length, and this colon was divided into 3 sections: proximal, middle, and distal. And from each of these 3 sections, 4 sections were analyzed from each animal in order to perform histologic assessment through dyeing with hematocin, eosin sections. Some plasma samples were also obtained from these animals at the end of the intervention, and some immune parameters were determined, along with the oxidative stress, by the analysis of total antioxidant capacity by counteract method. Regarding the results and discussion of this thesis, first of all, we have seen that these individuals at risk of food insecurity at baseline, as we were expecting, presented a reduced intake of vegetables, fruits, fish, and legumes comparing to the recommendations by the World Health Organization. Also, it is worth noting that the level of consumption of diet-derived compounds was significantly associated with microbiota and with immunological parameters. More specifically, we've seen that the intake of fibers in green is inversely associated with microbiological families such as Clostridia USG 014, which have been increased in colitis models, in the fecal content of colitis models. And also the intake of xenobiotics for the first time has been significantly associated with the level with the fecal level relative abundances of some microbiological families such as Streptococcus or Ehrlichiaceae, which have been increased in fecal content of individuals with polyps or adenomas. Also, as we can see in the heat map of the right, the level of intake of xenobiotic is significantly associated with the circulating levels of immunological parameters such as TNF or some adipokines. Regarding the effect of the intervention, we've seen that the 4-week Mediterranean diet intervention increased the intake of vegetables and fruits and reduced the intake of processed meats. In consequence, increased levels of intake were obtained for polyphenols such as lignans, and for the first time, the Mediterranean diet was effective to reduce the intake of xenobiotics through reduced intake of dibenzoanthracene, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or nitrosamines. In parallel, the 4-week intervention produced changes in the microbiota profile composition through reduced relative abundances of Actinomyces tota and belonging families such as Corynebacteriaceae, Ehrlichiaceae, or Clostridia USG 014, which is in line with the modifications observed in low-fat, increased in high-fiber diets intervention. Also, changes in the immunological profile were observed through reduced IL-2, 6, and 12, and increased IL-10 and adiponectin. This is in line with the associations found between Mediterranean diet adherence and the circulating levels of these cytokines in other works. Finally, an amelioration of other indicators of health were observed since a reduced severity of depressive symptoms was noted in these individuals, and amelioration of discrimination for salt was observed in this population. This is especially important because there was high evidence showing that an increased intake of ultra-processed foods is associated with a reduced discrimination or sensitivity potential. Finally, regarding the animal intervention, we have seen for the first time that the FIP at the doses of intake in humans along with DSS promoted damage on intestinal mucosa. Although we have not seen the formation of aberrant crypts, which is in terms with the results shown by other authors, for the first time we have characterized this damage, and we've seen increased focal inflammation, diffuse inflammation, erosion, and crypt loss. These are the histological alterations observed in our animals. DSP plus DSS, along with this increased damage, specifically in the distal section, provoke changes in microbiota through increased Clostridia USG 014 or reduced monoglobus along the intervention. Also promote changes on the content of short-chain fatty acids in feces, reducing valeric, isobutyric, and isovaleric content, which could be associated with an increased damage of in the intestinal mucosa. And also we have seen a reduced antioxidant total capacity in the blood samples of these animals. This is in consonance with increased oxidative status observed in colitis models. Regarding the effect of diet-derived compounds, we have seen that fiber and probiotic reduced this damage and counteracted the observed change in Phe plus DSS through different ways. First of all, fiber reduced diffuse inflammation and creep loss, and also counteracted the changes observed in terms of microbiota by reducing Clostridia, USG014, monoglobus, or increasing alistipes. As well, it increased IL-17F, which has been reduced in colitis models with Phe plus DSS administration. And in the terms of probiotic, we have seen increased colon length, which has been observed in parallel with the amelioration of intestinal mucosa by other authors, and we have seen similar pathways of counteracting microbiota alterations, reducing Clostridia USG 014, similarly to the fiber group. Also in this case, changes in cytokine levels were observed, since increased IL-22 were observed after probiotic supplementation, and this is similar to the results shown by other authors in humans with similar probiotic strains. Finally, in terms of the conclusion of my thesis, we have seen that first, the developed method for the quantification of the intake of xenobiotics showed higher degree of accuracy in the estimation of heterocyclic amines, nitrates, nitrites, and nitrosamines. Second, Phe emerged as the main therapeutic target in the population, highlighting the need to implement dietary strategies aimed at reducing its level of consumption and/or the impact of its intake in the population. Third, the educational and nutrition intervention based on Mediterranean diet proved to be effective in modulating the composition of the fecal microbiota, as well as improving markers of inflammation, contributing to the understanding of the interplay diet microbiota in individuals at risk of food insecurity. Fourth, dietary fiber supplementation was identified as a strategy of interest to counteract the detrimental effect of the intake of Phe plus DSS. And fifth, although the intake of the probiotic seems to modulate the activity and composition of fecal microbiota, it is not possible to establish its potential to reverse at the intestinal level the damage provoked by Phe plus DSS. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to hear any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aida, for the nice presentation. It was really interesting to see the topic of your PhD. And now we will move on to the question and answer section. Everybody is welcome to type their questions in the question and answer box. We have a question from somebody. It's saying, in the mouse study, in the fiber group, how did you how was the fiber content compensated to make sure that the total carbohydrate intake was similar in the control and the fiber group?
Thank you so much for your question, Sarah. In this case, the diets were especially prepared for our study, and we checked there was no weight loss in these animals supplemented with diet. It was only 6% diet, which has been shown to not affect animals' growth a long time. So there was no significant difference in the content of carbohydrates between control, fiber, or probiotic group. This is in the supplementary material of our work if this person wants to check it, but there was no significant difference.
Super, thank you. Well, then I have a question from my side. In the human intervention trial, did you include some recommendations on the cooking treatments that the people should use to avoid the techniques that are more related to the production of those xenobiotic compounds?
Yeah, our main objective with this intervention was obviously to improve their health status, at least through diet, because these individuals, we have to think they were in a very complex situation. They were receivers of food aids. They had really low income, so they had a really complex situation. So through diet, we wanted to help them at least a little bit with their complex environment. What we provided to them is available in the website of Alimerca Foundation, which was the founder of this project. And we can see that it was very easy recipes, recommendations, so that they could adjust these recommendations to their diet. It was not a very strict diet. We wanted them to adjust our recommendations to their habits because we know the adherence is higher if we do that. So mainly we recommended them to increase the intake of fruits, vegetables, and fish, as you saw, and to cook them through microwave stews. These traditional cookings, we know that we are letting go, and we have more rapid, quick cooking methods instead. So we suggest them to try to get back to these traditional cookings that takes longer and we need organizing, but we know that we have seen through our studies that they really have an effect on health. So that was the recommendation.
That's really nice. And you were mentioning about the adheration of these people to the new nutritional habits. So I was wondering if did you do some following questionnaire to see if they adhere to those new habits and if that was.
In this case, it was only 4 weeks, and they didn't have much time available to get to our appointments. So we only did one, we explained the recommendations, and then we did the check-in after 4 weeks time. It's obvious that if we wanted to do the intervention for longer, it would be very advisable to get a point in the middle just to check everything is going on right. But they were free of letting us know if they need any help, and some of them got in touch because they were really interested in our intervention, and they really appreciate the effort, so they were really into it. And some of them got in touch when they had any question, but there was no set appointment.
It's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice, the work. Well, changing a little bit, I was wondering if did you try any in vitro methods to assess the toxicity of those compounds that you were assessing in vitro? I was wondering if there was any complementary data that you didn't present in vitro.
Yeah, I'm actually very happy you asked this question because that was the main subject of my internship in UK in the University of Northumbria with Danny Comain. What we did there was analyze the effect of FIP plus DSS and FIP alone on 3 in vitro models to analyze the effect in permeability, more or less, and the metabolites derived from the fermentation of these compounds to analyze the effect as well through cacao-2 monolayers, just to get an idea of how things would look like. We don't have any data yet because it was just before getting into the thesis. So I'm still trying to recover after it, and we'll get back to it soon, hopefully.
That's really nice. Well, I think that we don't have more questions from audience, but thank you so much. It has been really nice and really clear questions that you reply. So thank you. It was really good.
Thank you. Thank you all for this opportunity and for watching. And congratulations for these events. I think they are very helpful for all of us.
Thank you, Aida.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
I think I just I'm gonna share my screen so that we can announce the next webinar. So okay, yeah. First of all, Aida, thanks. The discussion and all the results and everything was very interesting. Then so for our next webinar in July the 2nd, we will have Dan Liu from Wageningen University from the Netherlands. And then after our summer break in August, we will have in September, the 3rd of September, to Nicholas Horlancher from University of Otago from New Zealand. So then we are looking for speakers for October, November, and December. So if you're interested in presenting some of the results of your research on food digestion, just reach out, send us your expression of interest in this email that you see in the screen. That's it. So see you on the next webinar next month. Bye-bye.